Hello, happy Monday evening.
Happy Monday evening.
This is the Two Mats podcast brought to you by the subscribers of the New European.
It is.
And we are joined by, I'm delighted to say we're joined by Peter Hyman.
This is a special episode.
Yeah, this is a special because Peter wrote what I've just described to him as the most debated and reacted to piece I think we've ever run, really, which was the cover the week before last, which was headlined How to Beat Populism. And it was a very precise and thorough diagnostic of where you feel, and this, by the way, we must discuss this word progressives a bit more as well, but where you feel the progressive centre has got it wrong in the past in its attitude and its demeanour, and also kind of optimistic prognosis for how we might make amends and fight against the tide of corrosive nationalism, etc., etc. Yeah. So just to explain who you are, Peter, you were a senior advisor to Tony Blair for 5 or 6 years, weren't you?
9 years.
Not really? Oh, forgive me, way back when. And most recently, you've advised Keir Starmer, but not officially anymore, right?
No, so this time I didn't go into government, but that's why I'm working on this project about how you counter populism and far-right populism. Yeah. So that's what I've been doing since the election.
For a book, yes?
Hopefully writing a book, but also just thinking about what is the... So not just the analysis, but starting to think about what are the solutions to it, what are the things you can actually do practically.
And pertinently to this conversation later on is you are currently a head teacher. You established...
Well, I was before going back to Keir.
And you established a free school, School 21 in Newham, in Stratford.
Award-winning.
Which is that whole topic is fascinating, and we're going to deal with that in the last third of this podcast.
Yeah, great.
Welcome.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
I mean, just to start at the beginning, as it were, when I was sent the copy, when Matt sent the copy over, it was one of those articles that I thought immediately, this is very special, and not least because of this line: "We are to blame for Trump. We created him. We gave him and other far-right populists the space to manoeuvre and the mistakes to exploit." Can you start from that premise, Peter, and talk about that? Because it's a big, bold statement.
Yes, and I think it's the case because I go on to talk about the 7 deadly sins.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's what I was trying to say. I think we haven't too often, and this is true of Trump, who's the most recent, which is what I was writing about. He was about to be inaugurated and obviously just has. But, you've covered since Brexit all the problems of that vote. And in a way, that is the thread that joins the two. And then across Europe, there have been plenty of other examples. So this is about what's going on in the world and how generally those in the centre are still showing up too often in the wrong way. So when I talked about the 7 deadly sins, I talked about things like that we are gullible whenever I use a slightly unfortunate analogy maybe, or one about every time Trump drops a turd on the sidewalk of something he said to wind us up, or what, we get distracted. We pick up the turd, we examine it, we sniff it, and meanwhile he's gone on and is doing exactly what we want. And we take the bait every time. We're too abstract. For us, A plus B very rarely equals C in the way that it does for the populist, because we believe in complexity, and that's obviously a good thing in many ways, but sometimes it has that problem. We're too conservative. We often don't have the courage of our convictions. There's a whole series of, we're censorious. The idea of cancel culture, if someone hasn't put things in exactly the way we've decided linguistically they now need to put things, then there's a problem. So I think you don't get permission to get to the next stage of what are your policies then if you haven't shown up in the right way, which is to understand people and their lives. And I think the number one I put in that list was that we're patronising too often. Not all of us, not all the time, but there is a sense, and people like Michael Sandel writes incredibly well on this.
This is the tyranny of merit.
This is the tyranny of merit, but this idea that, so what we've said over many years is the more you learn, the more you earn. Your job is to get to university, and then your life will be changed. But if you don't get to university, then what is the implication of that? The implication is somehow you're either lazy or you're stupid or maybe something else. But it means you've got lower status because the thing you were meant to do, you haven't done. If at the same time you're therefore earning less money because you haven't gone to university, and you're deemed not to be woke enough or saying the right things, then there is a sense from a lot of people in which, and I saw this in America when I was out there for the elections, in which you are being disrespected, that people think you are sort of a lower class citizen within society. And after a while, that is something that people, they don't want to feel shame. There's a lot written about the word shame, which I think is quite important.
Yeah,
people are sort of being
Ali
shamed.
Russell Hochschild's
yes,
book.
has just done a book on that.
Which I mentioned in a piece in response to yours.
I
think it's, and my own writing about the election, the point that was regularly made to me was that Trump made it easy to vote for him, and the Democrats, for all their claims to be building a huge coalition, by implication set all sorts of purity tests.
Yes.
In other words, MAGA was saying, come on in.
Yeah.
And the Dems were saying, are you up to it?
Exactly.
Are you
and
worthy
there are lots of reasons why you're not
Are you worthy of voting for us?
Exactly. And of course, and you've touched on, MAGA is a very powerful national message. It's not a collection of individual issues or identities aggregated, which is often what the left or the centre does. It is a national project of Make America Great Again. And there was no equivalent patriotic project on the Democrat side.
Which is bizarre. I mean, we've talked a lot on the pod actually, about what we've sort of provisionally called internationalist patriotism. And it doesn't seem to be a particularly difficult idea to embrace. But why is it, do you think, that progressives, for want of a better word, Peter, tend to recoil from anything that involves the nation and belonging and so on?
I think it's because we have that history, as you've just touched on, of internationalism. We see ourselves as well as being European. We think there's still something we're a bit squeamish about, sort of flying the flag in a more overt way. There is something, obviously on the far left, and Corbyn embodied this, the international socialists actually feel there's more in common, not with the sense of nation, but with socialists in other countries. So they literally don't have that sense of a border, and that, it's antithetical to their belief that you would defend one country over another. So you've got that strain within the left as well. But I think it's a problem. And I think if all the left or the centrists do is put a Union Jack behind a politician and think they've done patriotism, I think we've got a real problem. There's got to be a story that is told about the country. And one of the things I put in the piece was this idea, which again I don't think the left fully understands, is for many working people, the idea of being born British, whatever the problems of the country at any one time, they think they won the lottery.
Yes.
They don't feel, I would rather have been French, rather have been German, rather have been Italian.
Yeah.
They think there's something incredibly special about being British, with our humour and our satire and our stiff upper lip and all the characteristic qualities, and the fact that we're sort of quirky in different ways as a nation. That is something that people want to celebrate, and I think the left doesn't always get that.
There was a woman on an Auschwitz survivor, because of course we're recording this today on the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, and she emigrated to the UK, and she was asked, and how's that gone? She said, I think England is the greatest country in the world. And I must say, as I heard it was refreshing, but it was kind of, you don't hear it enough. You don't hear the country getting talked up. And I think a lot of people would say that for the first 6 months of Keir's government, he hasn't given the sense that he's talking up the country. He's given the sense of a country that's broken and that really needs some real remedial hard work doing. Do you think, has he played that card correctly?
This is so difficult, because the political strategist in me says that, what you've got to do, because you've got to buy time. If the problems the country faces are really difficult, and they will take time, turning around the health service or whatever it is, getting growth is a hard thing to do, then you've got to explain to people why the problems are where they are. So you've got to blame the last lot, because you don't blame yourself initially, and it's not fair to blame a government that's just got in. So you're doing a lot of of the clobbering of what came before, and they've left us a mess, and so you appear to be that the downside. You can see strategically why you do that, but the downside of doing that is then you're not telling a more optimistic story. Overall, Labour is best when it's talking about opportunity, the future, something optimistic, a sense of hope, a sense of where we can get to, and I think that's always got to be part of the mix.
Is it too gradualist in strategically? Because I mean, here we are, only 1 week into the Trump second presidency, and I feel like it's been a year. You know, the first week has been a whirlwind of kineticism, and of course, I suspect the three of us probably don't like much of the content, but one has to acknowledge that just the sheer impact of it, the blunt force trauma is administered, is it's being felt globally and left his opponents reeling. Now, I'm not suggesting for a minute that Starmer should have done that, but is there a lesson there about hitting the ground running and the need for aggressive impatience in modern politics?
Aggressive impatience is a very good word. I mean, the word I would use, but I like that, is disruption.
Yeah,
because I think there's a real visceral sense in which the way that politics has been conducted, the way institutions have functioned, has not served people well, and it's all the combination of the stagnant wages and living standards not rising with the performance of public services. So there's been a performance problem which has fueled the far right. If governments of the centre were performing better, or generally governments, there would not be this space. And that's why I partly said at the beginning of the article about, we have created the space. It's our mistakes that have led to this. So I think we've got to be, and this is an age where people have a sense of creativity and possibility. People are on their phone the whole time, publishing things and liking things and sharing things and creating things. There's all of that sense of dynamism, and that's completely at odds with a government way of operating and a politics way of operating which seems of a different age.
Well, systematic technocracy. Surely that it may be, that is in fact what it amounts to in a sense, but actually presenting it as such with relish seems to me a mistake. I mean, of course you have to fix the foundations, and of course you have to blame the last lot.
Yeah.
But saying that isn't enough, is it?
I don't think it's enough, but it's a real debate. I mean, one of the critiques of the piece that I wrote was that we've got to cling on to the idea of nuance and complexity, and you need, grown-ups to fix things, and that will take time, and it's not all, about comms, and it's not all about bursts of energy like Trump has done. It's about the serious graft of what you need to do, and there's some truth in that. I don't think it's enough, because I don't think the track record of a business as usual approach is actually good enough to continue with that. I think the appetite for people saying we need a different way of doing things. You never know if you're in a sort of end of an era, sort of ancien regime period until you're sort of a historian 30 years later. But I can't help thinking we're at a period of time now where the post-war settlement has properly come to an end.
Yes, I agree.
And there was one burst under Thatcher where she obviously readjusted quite a few parts of that settlement. But I think now, the health service is a good example. We can agree that we want to keep to the principle of free at the point of use. But the idea that you can incrementally now change a service that just is not keeping up with the needs, there's got to be something more radical. The idea that the state and the way it operates, we used to talk about the Rolls-Royce civil society. It's just not fit for purpose. There are a lot of incredibly good people in it, like with the health
but that's
service.
not the point you're making.
The point is that the system is not operating in a way that it can deliver. So disruption has to happen, in my view.
One of the 7 deadly sins that you haven't mentioned that you pointed out was that we're bland.
Yes.
And that touches on the points you've just made. You said that the left's range of emotion starts at earnest and ends at sincere.
Yeah.
And I think, it is.
That's a T-shirt, isn't it?
Now, without personalising this too much, this isn't the most charismatic government we've ever had. How far does charisma go, do you think, in this effort to battle populism?
Well, I also say we're the TikTok of the antique carriage clock, and not the viral clip.
Yeah.
So look, I mean, I think in a way it's less about individual charisma of an individual politician. I think it is a mindset. Because I think you can disrupt in a number of ways. Politicians come in different guises. You can hold up a particular approach of saying, well, that's the one that cuts. So it's actually quite unpredictable. When I've looked at far-right leaders, the chancellor candidate in Germany, and the elections are just coming up, Weidel, is someone who is an economist in a same-sex relationship, actually living outside Germany and bringing up 2 children in Switzerland. Now, that's not a cookie-cutter, far-right, populist, strong man,
No.
And she's sort of reasonably charismatic, but not particularly. But the AfD are doing... So I don't think there's one approach, but I think it's a mindset of, as we've talked about, disruption. And also, I think you do, in terms of the bland, I think you do have to tell better stories, be interesting in how you tell those stories so that you can capture the imagination and the agenda.
Yeah.
And I think that needs a lot of work. There's an art to that.
Yeah.
It's not an easy thing, and it's not what politicians naturally do.
Yeah.
Partly to their credit, they want to get out the policy rather than the talking point behind the policy, which is what actually people latch onto.
I think it's fair to say, and again, I'm not trying to. We've been quite critical of Keir Starmer up to date because of what we see as a lack of ambition or articulated ambition. Let's say
audacity,
a lack of audacity. That's the word that keeps coming through. Where's the audacity? And I think people are crying out for that, and in its absence, anybody else's audacity is seen to trump technocracy. Is that fair?
I mean, I was one of the people behind the missions, and just to explain what they were trying to do, they were a way of increasing the ambition after many years where, inevitably, if you have 5 prime ministers in 7 years, you're trying to get through the week or the month. You're not actually trying to plan for the future. So to say, here are 10-year projects, if you like, and they were meant to be invitational with many players in the country and in different communities being part of it. They weren't meant to be Keir's missions so much as the nation's missions. It was a way of raising our sights and saying that actually Britain can do important things again and big things and change the terms of trade. So they were meant to be, the missions, a battering ram for a different way of doing government, about devolving power, about galvanising civic society. And I saw that a bit. I mean, one of the things I quote was when we did a first round table on knife crime with a lot of experts and police and charities involved in it. When Keir started by saying our mission is to halve knife crime, you could see the people around the table immediately thinking, well, I can't just bring my normal game here.
Yeah.
The stakes have been raised.
Yeah.
So I've got to start thinking afresh about, well, what do we need to do? And, we had one about halving violence against women. We had, obviously, there's other bold. So I think that setting those ambitious goals can be a way of then shaking things up and disrupting them. And that was the intention. And I hope the government's going to keep to that the sort of bold intent behind what the missions were.
Did your heart not sink a little bit, though, in that speech that Keir gave where he started to remind us of the missions, but then added in the milestones and the goals and the aims and the strategy, and it suddenly it felt like he was reading out a planning report from, a council meeting. It lacked that sense of, okay, I know where we're going.
Well, it needs to be more invitational and galvanising, but also you do need milestones, because if something's a 10-year horizon, people also want things changing along the way.
Yeah.
So you can't just say, well, wait 10 years. So a milestone's a good idea, but the ambition shouldn't be lost.
Yeah.
So there may be a milestone of recruiting more, if you take the Home Office and crime, more police officers, which we need, but it's got to be in service of those bolder ambitions, to tackle antisocial behaviour, deal with knife crime, deal with antisocial behaviour. So I think you can do both, but we mustn't lose the sense of ambition.
I was very struck that you champion a smaller, more strategic state. Now, more strategic, unimpeachable.
Yeah.
Smaller, though, I was struck by and wanted to ask you about, because when you look at the sort of challenges of the 21st century, climate change, inequality, technology, population mobility, social care, healthcare, they're all big problems. And even with an attack on waste and perhaps a smaller civil service that's higher paid, or some of the things you mentioned, I just wonder how realistic it is to say the state will get smaller in the next quarter of the 21st century.
I think it's got to be exactly the things you meant. It's got to be smaller but more strategic in the following way. I mean, first of all, just to outline some of the numbers that people might be surprised at, there are 7,000 communication officers in Whitehall. Now, we can debate how good communications has been so far, but 7,000.
So you're talking about 7,000 press officers and media managers. And stuff. That's incredible.
So it's not 70 or 700.
Well, let's put that that's more. I'm just doing some back of the paper maths in my head now. I think that's more than there are full-time journalists in national newspapers right now.
Well, so that gives you a good example. There are 11,000 or nearly 11,000 people in the Cabinet Office. Okay.
Wow.
I spoke to a permanent secretary the other day, really good permanent secretary, who said, I would give anything to have half the number of civil servants, but to pay them more, because when the best civil servants and the most senior, when they reach 30, particularly if they're living in London, they end up leaving us, going to PwC or a management consultant, get £100,000 more, and they kind of need that to buy a home or start a family or all the rest of it. Yeah. So, that's one example where he says we could actually function better and do the job better and have more strategic people and pay them to retain them. But that's not, what we're doing at the moment. So I think this is about having a really strategic centre that's setting the direction and has got first-rate people. And we've got to, within the civil service, also diversify the skill set, because we can't just have the sort of well-meaning generalists. Some of those are important. We've got to have the project managers and the people who understand technology and all the rest of it. So you've got to recruit an additional set of people as well. We've also got to devolve power. So part of the smaller strategic centre is devolving power so you can properly, have things done in the right way in communities and give mayors more power.
And presumably you have to bring expertise from outside of government into specific areas of government and give them some meaningful input, which isn't necessarily happening, is it?
Yeah, and you've got to ask the question let's take the mission areas. Who are the best people in the country to deliver this?
Right.
So with the best will in the world, this is no criticism of who's currently doing it. If you get the current sort of middle-ranking grade 7 who is in charge of housing in the department to build 1.5 million homes, that person, because the civil service rotates so often, has probably been in charge of Badgers 6 months earlier in DEFRA, is now in charge of housing, has never built any houses in their life. Now, what do you want? You want a crack team of people who understand planning laws, develop, how you develop housing projects. So you want private sector, public sector, civil society. You want them in a multidisciplinary team with the ability to report to the Secretary of State and the Prime Minister in certain cases, with the proper resources to get on and bash through anything that is getting in the way. So yes, these have got to be the best possible people for the job.
You also, Peter, I think raised what for me is one of the kind of core points, and you did it very well, the whole idea of people against the powerful.
Yeah.
And alarmingly, the right are quite good at that. Not in providing solutions, but in winning the argument. At the moment, at any rate. One of the things that Starmer said, and we can quit him of an offhand remark, because it was just an offhand remark, was that he'd rather be at Davos than Westminster. Now, he wasn't Prime Minister then, so we can put it to one side. But it is illustrative of an attitude that is, by the way, not confined to the Labour Party. That in the end, all regimes are oligarchies, and it's just how they present themselves.
Yeah.
And winning this argument that, as it were, progressives see the people in deindustrialized areas, the people who've been left behind, the people who are, really at their wits' ends and feel that they have no status or pride, is a massive lift. And it's an odd place we've ended up, because the Labour Party, which came out of the union movement and has its origins in the class analysis, is now dangerously, I think, becoming the party of university graduates and the middle class. And whilst I don't want to say Tom Baldwin wrote, "Let's not take university graduates for granted as voters," and amen to that, but I do think that until we address this, we're not even out the gate.
Exactly. So I would say that's definitely true. I really believe that. I would also say, to the credit of Keir and Labour, we got that more than, let's say, the Democrats did at the last election in the States.
Yeah,
in the sense
true.
that
They didn't get it at all.
A lot of what Keir was talking about before the election was, as a shorthand you might call, the respect agenda, which was respect, using his own story to explain the respect, or the fact that his sister is a care worker, or grounding himself, and it's genuine in terms of how he was brought up or what he actually believes in life or what he's studied, is that idea of respecting everyone, and particularly working people, and that sense of his father being disrespected and whatever. So for him, it's quite in him as a concept that you've got to be siding again with working people. And so I think we were better placed, and one of the reasons there was a big majority, there were many, was that. And I think in government that's got to be continued, because that is, the central project, people say, well, what's the story? The central project for this government, it seems to me, is to rebalance the country to working people.
Yeah.
And in everything, that has got to be stressed. So
do you think that's coming through?
I think it is in some areas, but I think the joining the dots, which was always the problem, because you've got 20 departments and 5 ministers, so you've got 100 ministers all putting out their stuff. How you get the thread together is we used to call it the washing line, of which everything hangs off, is absolutely crucial. And there's choices to be made. I mean, the New Deal for working people, the workers' rights policy, is sometimes billed by the government as a way of helping growth. People debate whether that's the case. There's lots of the critiques would say it's just giving in to the unions.
Yeah.
Actually,
it's a good idea.
Actually, the line should be, this is about dignity in the workplace. It is rebalancing
100%.
after many years, so that people properly have, in an age of chronic insecurity, greater security. And I think you could sell it as one of the building blocks, along with the most popular thing the government's done by a mile since the election in all the polling is the living wage.
Yeah.
Is increasing basically the minimum wage and the living wage. And the governors and senators who buck the trend in America, a lot of them were on that, wages, paying more overtime. They were in this sort of living standards territory. And so I think a lot of what we talk about and Labour talks about in government has got to be justifying this claim of rebalancing the country to working people.
When you were touring America, Peter, what is it about Trump, who's a modestly successful real estate tycoon, let's put it no further than that, and a very successful TV reality star, but has absolutely no claim to working class credentials at all, quite the opposite.
No.
What is it about him that makes the poor and the left behind of America feel seen by him? Because it is a unique feature of his sort of suite of political tools, isn't it?
I think he was very good at combining those elements we talked about earlier of status, economics, and the sort of anti-wokeness. It was saying that your life, that the liberal elites are patronising and looking down upon, it is okay to own a gun, be a churchgoer, live outside the cities.
Believe in two sexes.
Yeah, believe in two sexes. That is a legitimate point of view. I'm honouring that point of view. I'm hearing it. I'm respecting it. You're allowed to be like that. And I think he connected, and it in a way that you could argue Boris Johnson connected with the Red Wall when he was successful and he was Eton educated and all the rest of it. one of the strange bits of all of this is you don't have to be working class necessarily to then, empathise with other working class, or sometimes it helps.
And in his case, a multiracial working class coalition now.
Exactly. And I was hearing a lot people saying, you see, it's only the left that thinks the issues that they care a lot about must trump, let's say, the economic ones.
Yes.
Yeah.
So how many times you hear the sentence stem, how can anyone vote for Trump when he is so racist, so misogynistic, whatever? And the answer is, these people aren't voting on those things. So they've aimed off for, yes, he's misogynistic. How can a Latino person, when he's called all Mexicans rapists, vote? We're incredulous as part of the, if you like, liberal. How can I? Well, the answer is they think he's stronger, has a better economic policy, will fight for their families better than Kamala Harris will.
Yeah.
And they're not voting on how misogynistic or racist he is.
Which comes back to your point about abstractions, because I thought one of the disasters of that campaign was the discussion of the opportunity economy. Yeah. And actually, there were some good stories Kamala Harris had to tell, like describing the tariffs as a sales tax.
Yes.
That was a good idea.
That was good.
But it never got cut through.
No. And people didn't think, look, whether it's the right proxy, they think he's a businessman. I was hearing this a lot, who, because he's been successful, we can debate how successful.
He looks successful.
He looks successful, and he thinks, even if, they were also very realistic, the people I said. They said, well, we know he's out to get, billionaires more money, and most of the benefit will probably happen at the top. But they sort of, in a slightly funny way, believe there would be some trickle down, that if he's going to run the economy better, and they didn't think Kamala Harris had much of an economic policy, then actually we will see a wider group will benefit from that.
I also think there is something in the fact that he's funny. He's funnier than Kamala. But also, we've had this debate about, is there a new constituency of voters who are basically thrill seekers, who don't feel that there's a massive consequence either way, but they know that that's going to be more exciting and more interesting. So let's give it a go. Brexit, Trump, let's get them. Let's just throw it in the air and see what happens.
I think in a way it's not thrill seeking, it is more disruption. It's the old ways aren't working for me, because thrill seeking implies they're less concerned about whether it's better for their family or better for their children. I think people are still, they're wanting the better things, the aspirations, the dreams for their family. Mm-hmm. I mean, the thing, again, it's slightly hard sometimes for the left to understand, is because they think the populists are all about grievance. The Trump was more hopeful than Kamala Harris. They were voting for hope. Yeah. You sometimes associate more the left with hope, or Obama was Mr. Hope, and yes, we can. They thought, they were hopeful that he would cut through the crap, Trump, and he would change things and shake them up, and that would be better for my life. They were voting on a hope message.
Right, let's take a very quick break, and we'll come back and explore in a little bit of depth some of the specifics, especially the specific pushback that some commentators gave to the piece. Welcome back, dear listeners. We are with Peter Hyman. We are exploring the reaction to his...
Essayist extraordinaire.
Essayist du jour, man of the moment. Du monde. I was listening to some of the there was lots of reaction to your piece. The Telegraph did a great big column all about it, which we were very grateful. Thank you, Daily Telegraph. Rory and Alistair did a big talk about it. Failed to credit the New European during the whole duration of the conversation, unbelievably. Rory said you had kind of blithely skipped over immigration as a thing, as a real topic, and he said words to the effect of, if we don't deal with immigration, then whatever else we talk about, no one's listening, because that's all they care about. Now, what's your response to that?
Well, the first response is he may not have read to the end of the piece. Admittedly, it was quite a long piece, because I did have quite a big chunk at the end. But look, I sort of agree with that point, in the sense that, look, all the far right, and I mean, we all know this, all the far right parties across the world start from immigration and build out. So you've got to address it, and you've got to address it properly. And I think one of the starting points is, and this isn't actually true, but it's such a received wisdom, which is the idea that people are being prevented from talking about it, that it's somehow taboo, and that it's, we can't have an honest discussion about it. Now, I think actually there's been quite a lot of places where there has been a discussion.
People don't log on to X if they don't think...
No, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think it's unfair, but I think what that means, let's say, for the Labour government here is, I suppose what I would recommend is actually having a proper, full-on debate and town hall meetings and online forums where you can contribute.
Hug the cactus. Hug the cactus.
Well, hug the cactus is a good phrase. And I think, look, and again, as a political strategist, I'd be in two minds about that, because you're always debating: do you really want to be on other people's more on other people's territory?
Yeah, but that was the Remain mistake in 2016.
That was the Remain mistake, or should we be on the health service, not on immigration? I think you've got to address it in a fundamental way, and you've got to give all opinions a real airing. Now, in the end, it's not just about airing it. You've got to get to a good policy. So you've actually, and again, people, and we know this from the polling and talking to people, people distinguish between the sense of lack of control of people coming into the country randomly in boats, and a discussion about what immigration you need and what's fair and who do you give asylum to if they're fleeing persecution, in which case the numbers are pretty liberal and tolerant, and people very accepting of it. And I think, again, the policy has got to deal with both sides of that, and you've got to have a system of integrity, and that is properly removing people who shouldn't be here and all of that, because then that cuts off first of all, it's fairer to everyone, but also it cuts off the immediate attacks. But then you've got to have a proper debate on what immigration we do need and for what purposes and all the rest of it. But so I would go very big on this, and I would spend a few months, even if there's criticism, why are you just focusing on this issue, really addressing it in a fundamental way.
To flip it over, if the government and indeed progressive counterpart parties in other countries don't, then what's happening at the moment will just continue.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, it is unfortunately a precondition of all else.
Yes.
It's become so neuralgic, and certain aspects of the debate have been treated so daintily by the left of centre and so squeamishly, that not to do exactly what you're saying, Peter, is, I think, courting disaster, actually. I really do. And I say that as someone who's personally sort of almost off the charts pro-immigration, but I was inspired by your piece to sort of write a bit about it, because I realised that you'd kind of posed an exam question, which was, well, what are we going to do about this? And I wouldn't pretend for a moment to have come to a definitive conclusion, but it is clearly incumbent upon us all to kind of wrestle with it and look at it in an honest but also reflective and compassionate way. It is difficult.
But also, there's a thing, isn't it? I remember you saying very well when the numbers came out. Do you remember when the numbers came out in December, was it? And they said it's nearly 1 million people. It was 900 and something thousand people. And everyone was saying, this is an outrage. How can it be? How can we have let 1 million people into the country? And I think you said, and I agree wholeheartedly with it, is, well, maybe we do need 1 million. It's just that there was this sense that you've alluded to, that no one really knows what they're here for, what they're doing. What numbers do we need to keep the economy going, to counter low birth rate, to
massive vacancies in all sorts of sectors,
to counter all the seasonal, the permanent vacancies? It does seem like there's a generic fear of talking about immigration on the left that sort of overweighs a pragmatic conversation, which is, well, look, folks, if we don't have the immigration, then here's the consequences in 10 years' time. It's a disaster.
Yeah, and we haven't won the argument that we've just got to, I mean, we're agreeing here. I think we've got to talk about it. I was at a gathering of sort of European politicians recently, and sort of think tanks and others. And there's a shorthand for quite a lot of this, and they default, some of them default to, which I was sort of worried by, which is, you're just aping the populists. No. If you're now talking about this, you're following their agenda, you're responding to them, and that sort of, and then that's a slippery slope, and everything then gets more right wing because you're actually just following, and I just don't agree with that, because I think you've got to do it, you can do it in the right way, and it doesn't mean you're just following them, but you've got to be on this terrain. Yeah. For the reasons we've said. Otherwise, you're not neutralising if you're not talking about it. I was at the last rally of Kamala Harris, the eve of election in Philadelphia, and it wasn't part of her script.
Really?
It was the second most important, or joint first, along with cost of living and inflation in the American elections, and it hadn't even by election day be woven into. So it was a sense of which, if we don't talk about it,
It'll go away.
It'll somehow not be.
Yeah.
You've got to put it in this.
I mean, you've sat in the rooms where all of the, with all of the decision makers and all of the leaders and all of these input points coming in, the data points coming in. How is that decision getting made? Where is that pollsters saying, "Don't talk about it. They're winning there. We'll win here." Or is it led by a kind of more innate pathological fear that this is just not a space that we're good at dealing with? They're better than we are.
Yeah, and it'll be for a number of reasons. It might be you think the party is too divided if you open it up.
Right.
So that you then look, the divisions are opened up, and there'll be a bit of that within the. I mean, what's the story in America in part is for the first 2 or 3 years of the Biden administration, because they were sort of convulsed within the Democrat Party, they basically wanted to get rid of the sort of cruelest parts of the Trump first term position on immigration. But with it, they got rid of the whole lot. So you effectively did have open borders. I mean, the stats don't lie on this. Yeah. Obama was actually quite tough on it. Then Trump was, and then it soared under the first 2 or 3 years. Then they got a policy that was sort of not dissimilar from Obama and Trump's, and the numbers went down again. But they had this spike. So it is about not wanting to be divided is part of it, and that leads to problems. And it's for the reasons we said. It's a debate about where you want to put your firepower, what you want to talk about. And for this government, there will be, would they agree with what I'm saying about spend a few months? It's not, you never in government do nothing but one subject, but do you want to really up it? And then they would be weighing up, well, do you want to get over a public service reform message to show how much you're turning around the health service or other public services? There's always something competing.
Yeah.
But I think if in the next 2 years, it doesn't have to be done immediately, there isn't a really serious debate on immigration and boats and asylum, I think there'll be a problem.
Yeah, I agree with that. On economic populism,
yeah,
Peter, you rightly raised that whole area, and it's clear that all around the world, partly in response to the dramatic gains by the hard and far right, there are thoughts, well, maybe the progressive side of the street needs to offer a more populist message on the economy. What might that look like?
Yeah, look, the great dilemma for Labour, and we know this, is it's in order to get elected, it always wants to be very pro-business, very
fiscally conservative,
very stable on the economy, because it knows it's its Achilles heel. There's scarring from previous elections where the Tories have done in Labour, either with tax bombshells or whatever. So and I was part of the decisions you want to lock that down. You want to show that you're credible and all the rest of it. But at the same time, that people who are suffering from stagnant wages and falling living standards and, working 3 jobs on the doorstep, I was meeting lots of people who say, well, I've cancelled my summer holiday this year, or I'm doing an extra shift. It's a very real sense of cost of living. They want, and they also know that people are swanning around who aren't affected by all of this. So that is the dilemma of looking pro-business.
Every big swing in that sector of policy is going to be caricatured. So you go after inheritance tax for farmers, and that will immediately be the cause of a rally in Whitehall with Jeremy Clarkson, and it'll be called a tractor tax. Now, actually, it's a good policy. It is. So how do you get past that sort of old school reflex, which is, it's an omnishambles, we've got to retreat, we can't do this.
Well,
she hasn't, to be fair. I mean, Rachel Reeves hasn't retreated, but it is difficult, isn't it?
It's very difficult. And look, some of this is a strategy and communications thing, which is you've got to prepare anything that's going to be controversial. You kind of often want the battle, because it shows whose side you're on and all the rest of it. But battles have, you've only got to see at the moment something that in the scheme of things is relatively innocuous. in terms of the big picture, the private school tax breaks
Yeah.
being removed. But, I mean, that's causing, I mean, obviously they're foaming at the mouth in the Telegraph and elsewhere about it. But, you know, these things, you know, if people think these are worth the fight, you've got to plan it and organise it and have your champions coming out for it and demonstrating why you're doing it. And you've got to be prepared right from the start. You know, quite a lot of this is now happening for that battle. But in any of these things, you've got to lay the ground for it so that you can, and you've got to decide which of the battles that are both symbolically important but important in policy terms.
Yes.
You need the crossover so that the fight is genuinely worth it, so that you can.
Let me interject there and throw in the biggest example of that on the books right now, which is our relationship with the European Union.
Yeah.
Tell me this, because you're close to them. You know what, you must have had the conversations. Why are they so doggedly dismissive of every kind of potential olive branch that's being offered to us? And why are they so instinctively reactive against any suggestion that one day it might be in our national interest to rejoin a customs union, re-enter the single market, to take up youth mobility offers, this kind of thing? There's an instinctive, dogmatic, never going to happen. And I, for the life of me, can't understand the thinking.
Well, in terms of the run-up to an election, I definitely think the decision not to reopen Brexit and give an opening, you know, and you've got a lot. If you're Labour, you've got a lot of right-wing press against you, and you know who will be very skillful at turning it. You've got a lot of you've got Reform who are trying to capitalise and all the rest of it. So, do you want? Would you rather have a change message that focused on the cost of living, the National Health Service? So there's a sort of tactical question about what you open up and when. There's a second point, I think, about, and you might say the polls now are quite clear on this, is Labour doesn't want to be ahead of public opinion in saying we've got to be closer. It's got to feel like there's a genuine groundswell of saying enough is enough. We've tried being outside, it's not working. And it's not that, I think it's not that we go back in or that's on the cards at the moment, but we've just got to get closer. And you've then got to make it a purely economic thing and not get tangled up, although others will try to, in the sovereignty arguments and the you've got to make it. This is essential for growth, for living standards, for
exactly
the
presenting it not in any way as a relitigation of 2016. No
Exactly.
talk about buses, no talk about Cambridge Analytica, none of that.
Exactly.
Just say here we are in 2025, and here are the needs of our economy, and here are the opportunities that the various parts of the European Union offer. What's the most sensible thing to do? So you're talking not about rejoining the single market or rejoining the customs union, but joining them.
But both of your points that you've just made there seem eminently sensible, and yet the lived experience we've all had in the last few months has been the opposite of that. Not any sense of softening or pragmatism even, just a dogmatic refusal to even go there.
Well, then I'd make another tactical point. So this is me sort of thinking about, so I think at the point when you want to do something, the question is whether you drip feed it. Is it a good area, Europe? This is purely a political strategy decision, really, or tactical decision. Do you want to have laid the groundwork properly and then you sort of make a move, or do you want to just slowly get there and sort of before you know exactly what you want to do, you've already had a sort of deluge of opponents trying. So I think there is
a risk that people may take Keir Starmer at his word and believe that when he says there's no chance we're ever going back, that he means it. But we're all.
Well, look,
no.
I think he does. He and Rachel mean that the red lines that are drawn at the moment are proper red lines. The question, you mentioned the youth movement and other things. The question is, what are the I don't think there's an intention to break the red lines, but what can you do short of doing that?
Right.
And I think that is a genuine debate that will be had and should be had.
Brilliant. I want to take another very brief break and then come back and talk something which I know is absolutely core to your passion, which is education and the work you've done in education and where Britain could do better.
Yeah.
See you in a minute.
Welcome back, dear listeners. Hope you're enjoying this. I'm enjoying this conversation.
Very much so.
You guys are enjoying it. Are you enjoying it, Peter?
I'm loving it.
Well, one thing you do love is education.
Yeah.
You set up a free school. How long ago? That's 7 or 8 years ago.
2012.
School 21, named 21 because fit for the 21st century,
Indeed.
correct?
And we did another school called School 360,
Right.
which was about the circular nature of...
I think our erudite listeners would have got the 360 reference immediately.
I wasn't trying to be patronising.
But for the hard of thinking like me, it was a helpful elucidation.
It was actually based at 360 the High Street.
Yes.
Anyway, but tell us the thinking about behind the setting up of the school and how it's going and how your experiences can feed into the mainstream.
Yeah, and... what I did is I was working at Number 10 in 2003 and then left to become a teaching assistant and then trained as a history teacher and then...
So you just pause there a second. So you've got this incredible high status job, you're influencing government policy and you think, no, I'm going to go and be a teaching assistant.
I was a teaching assistant.
What was going on around there?
In a really tough inner city school, and I was humiliated on a daily basis.
Right.
Because
I'm not sure if it's in your book or his, but there's a very funny description of you telling him. And he's impressed.
Him being Blair.
Blair, in comes one of his star advisors and says, I'm off to teach.
Yeah.
And, Blair says, okay. And he says, that is heroic, but it's a little bit surprising. Something words to that effect.
No, exactly. I think
great
people
moment.
Didn't quite know or believe. I wanted to do something completely different. And of course, the great thing...
What was the impulse, though, Peter? Because it was obviously a very strong gravitational pull towards that vocation.
Yeah, although I didn't know when I was a teaching assistant whether I'd sort of survive it or stay there or then actually train as a teacher.
Yeah.
But I was always interested in education. I wanted to also be on the front line, having seen things from sort of government and Number 10. I wanted to sort of get stuck into sort of real life on the front line. And I was in this really difficult school with 1,200 teenagers. And which is some people's idea of hell, but I was just exhilarated by it. It was sort of in your face, this raw emotion.
Yeah.
And as I say, I was totally ill-equipped to deal with, young people who were running rings around me, and had many sort of scrapes and sort of humiliations of not being able to cope with it. But I also found it an incredibly sort of vibrant place to be. And also, politics is a great intellectual challenge of how do you, we've been talking about how do you position yourself, what's the strategy and whatever. And education as well is similarly challenging of thinking, well, how should we educate the next generation? What is it that makes a decent education? What is the purpose of school? And I, as well as the practical things about becoming a teacher, and I became a history teacher. But when I set up this school with two colleagues, Ollie and Ed, we thought deeply about, we've got a blank sheet of paper, which is an incredible privilege. And we had decided from the beginning to do a 4 to 18 school. So that you obviously combine primary and secondary, so you don't have the hiatus at the end of primary school. And we thought, well, what it should be about. And we came up with this philosophy of head, heart and hand, because what we thought was, it's not just enough to do the academic stuff, although that's a really good, important grounding. You need to develop the personal qualities, and that's increasingly important, and not least with AI and technology being able to do all the things that it does. You need to be able to, you need to have resilience. You need to be able to collaborate. You need to be able to...
the preparation for citizenship in a world of what amounts to digital chaos and is going to get more chaotic and confusing. That preparatory job, which was always part of education, has become, even in the time you were a teacher, Peter, I suppose, exponentially harder, hasn't it?
Yes, totally. And that's not, you see, if I think the mismatch now between the world, why do we need, and there's a curriculum review embarked upon by the government, look, it's got to be radical, because the gap between the world that young people are going into and what the diet of schools is just massive. So, how the sort of truth versus post-truth and how a child navigates that, how it makes sense of social media and technology. Schools, it's not their fault. They're busy with a lot of other things. No school is at the foothills of understanding AI and what its implications are. I know we're all grappling with it, but the schools have got to be at the forefront of thinking.
Also, they're exam factories, aren't they?
Yes. No. So they become, so all these things, creativity, problem solving, collaboration, good oracy and communication skills, That's not what school's about. School's about learning bodies of knowledge and regurgitating them in exams. And you need some of that knowledge. This isn't a knowledge versus skills debate, and it's too polarized, all of that. You need both. You need a grounding in good science and history and maths and all the rest of it. But it's not sufficient. It's not enough. So our school was trying to balance this out more.
And your kids do take oracy, the ability to speak and to present and
and it's
share.
more than that. And what we say about oracy is some people reach immediately, of which this is part of it for public speaking or debating. But in most people's job, there's not a lot of that. What there is how you communicate, either in small groups like this, we're a group of 3, but it might be you're trying to persuade someone in a one-to-one situation. It might be you've got a group of 8 or 10 colleagues you're trying to collaborate with. There's a whole set of contexts in which being able to speak really effectively and articulate your ideas and listen. In this world of polarization, one of the things we teach as well as the speaking is the listening. We want people to be sponges as well as hoses, to use the analogy.
But the hose part is a natural instinct for children, isn't it? But it's one that's shut down in most schools. I imagine most teachers in ordinary schools spend more time telling kids to shut up than they do to speak up.
This is a tragedy. And if you go into most secondary schools now, children are lined up in rows and almost nothing in every lesson. Because the emphasis is on there's so much content to get through, and the teachers have had to become obsessed with covering the curriculum. If you're doing triple science, biology, chemistry and physics for GCSE, you're covering 900 pages of content in 2 years.
Wow.
And therefore you don't see the wood for the trees. So even the conceptual knowledge of science passes you by because you're literally just picking up the accumulated facts. So it's not even a good way of learning science, let alone anything else. And therefore children are just there sort of lapping up this knowledge. So it's not...
I mean, it seems to me there were... Tell me if I'm wrong, Peter. There were 2 big things that went a bit wrong. So I was an education correspondent in the 90s. And then a few years ago, I came back and wrote a book which was partly about this. So I went back and did a bit of a dive. And I was truly shocked by the extent to which, schools had become exam factories, as you describe, and as Matt described. But the second thing was that what had appeared to be a socially emancipatory objective to get everyone into universities had become divisive and pointless to the extent that it had really marginal. Every government talks about a skills revolution, and then nothing happens. And I've it's funny because I've been associated with universities all my life, but I kind of feel that the dominance of campus culture in politics, particularly on the progressive side, is now so great that it's become very unhealthy.
So I agree with that, and I agree with your point about the sort of skills revolution. Look, both main parties have talked about this phrase parity of esteem between academic routes and vocational and technical. It's a sick joke. I mean, there's no parity of esteem, and that's one of the problems that we've already discussed about what's happening in America between the college educated and non-college, and it's happening here as well in terms of status and whatever. We need a skills revolution. We need a retraining revolution. We need to break down the assumption that everything has to be a 3-year degree. People want to learn increasingly at different points in their life, in different modules. You might want a 6-week AI primer course that you want to put millions of people on so that you can be really comfortable using AI to help you in the workplace or whatever it is. There's a whole set of things that you want to change the way we learn.
If I had the time now, I'd want to acquire a skill, whether it was coding or plumbing or that's what I feel I don't have.
Exactly. And the blend of the idea that the real route is to do some rarefied academic thing, and if you're a failure at that, then you've got a second-class option. I mean, that's why we talked about head, heart, and hand. The world is now a combination. There are very few jobs that aren't a combination of all 3.
It's interesting.
Just explain head, heart, hand then. What do you mean by each
head,
of
heart,
those?
and hand. Head is academics. So subject knowledge and all the rest of it. Heart is those personal qualities.
Emotional intelligence.
And resilience and collaboration and oracy. And hand is your ability to make, do, create, problem solve. We need a nation of problem solvers, of creative problem solvers. So whether you're a brain surgeon, a software engineer or a plumber, you're solving problems.
Yes.
In every single one of those jobs, you are looking at something that's not right or needs fixing or you need creating. And so school doesn't do that. That's not the way it thinks about things.
So what you're saying,
about buckets of knowledge, not how you fuse head, heart and hand together.
So what you're describing is a world that's still designed around a sort of educational Fordist factory model,
yes,
but actually should be educate to disrupt. Correct?
Exactly. And the sort of credentialism that about, I don't know what percentage, I'm going to make one up, but 70% of jobs in the future are about what you can do, not the qualification. If you want a website designed, you're not going to say, have you got a GCSE IT qualification? You're going to say, show me your website.
Right.
Yeah.
You're going to do it on the basis of their work. So
I can't remember the last time I ever asked anybody who was going to be a potential employee as a journalist.
Yes.
Where they went to school.
Do you have a journalism qualification, or do you have a
I'm not
whatever?
interested, yeah.
You're interested in what they can do.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that most jobs, now some of them you need particular medical qualification. Of course there is something, but most people, I think it is now 5. It used to be 1 in 6. It's growing quickly. 1 in 5 employers don't look at qualifications at all. Now think of the implication of that.
Huge.
At the moment, as parents and as schools and whatever, we say keep your head down, get your GCSE. We say to our own children, get your GCSE, get your A-level,
qualifications.
try and go to a Russell Group university, try and get your 2-1, come out at the end of this factory, and your life will be made.
Yeah.
And then those young people turn around. The employers say, "Well, we're not going to look at any of that."
Yeah.
Yeah.
At that point, they say, "Well, why didn't anyone tell me
What's
that
all
in the
that
first
about?
place? What was all that?
What's all this
slogging?
What's all this student debt I've got for?"
Exactly. Student debt. The best years of my life, when I was 16 or 18 or 20, I was slogging through these exams. First time I applied for a job, they use the phrase, employers often, which I think is actually not a bad phrase. We want young people with something about them.
Yes.
Now, something about them is not, I've got a certificate here for a few GCSEs. Something about them is, I'm a problem solver. I've got ingenuity. I can think laterally. I can collaborate with people.
So at your school, tell us what's different about your school. What would an average week entail at your school as opposed to an ordinary comp, a normal
the
comp?
first thing to say very bluntly is and this is why some of the debates now about the freedoms in the bill about academies and whatever. In secondary schools, there are no freedoms because you've got Ofsted breathing down your neck, which is a sledgehammer, and you've got the GCSE results and league tables. So you don't really have a secondary curriculum at all. You've got a series of syllabuses. So there aren't really... we tried at our school, even within those constraints of Ofsted and exam results, and it was often... Other schools came and thought this was great innovation. We knew it was in a way on the margins because we were still having to play the game. But what did we do? We had... a curriculum that was about oracy and leadership and well-being, where instead of a sort of tutor time or form time of sort of 15 minutes a day or whatever, we had lessons every day of 50 minutes to an hour. And in small groups of 12. So we managed to orchestrate that. So a young person had 12 people, and they were often in the round really debating issues, often moral issues, often really challenging issues. They were thinking about how they developed as a human being. There was a lot of mental health and well-being underpinning it. But that strand of the heart strand of the head, heart and hand, we were really sophisticated in the way we developed that in young people so that they had a toolkit that would help them in their life in different ways. And you could see the impact of that.
And what's the net result? I mean, what happens to your kids?
Well, they go on, and we need to. We've tracked some of them. We need to track them even better about what they do. But a lot of them are doing sort of really creative things. And when people meet them, they do say there is something. They've got something about them that they are articulate. We were incredibly reflective as a school in terms of how both staff and people reflected on their own practice. What are they good at? What do they need to improve at? We do this too little, so many of us in later life. It's not done at all in politics. Because in politics, you have to show no vulnerability.
Right.
You have to show your strength. No politician will really want to show, well, I'm not very good at that. Or, or advisors, because advisors are jostling for position around the main sort of politician. So it's an environment which is deeply unreflective.
Yeah.
And what we're trying to do in our school is bring up young people and staff as well who are thinking the whole time, how can I get better? What are my strengths? What are the things I need to develop? So the whole time you're both curious and you're humble and you're reflective about how you can grow and what the personal growth is at any stage. And so part of those sort of lessons I've been talking about was how you get that sort of personal growth.
So aggressive impatience matched by deep reflection.
Yes.
I'll buy that.
Yeah.
One of the
sounds good to me.
You talk about
sounds good to me.
The teaching side of things. I saw as a part of the prep for this, I watched a video of you expounding about these theories, and you quoted this stat which blew me away, which was that 40% of teachers leave after 4 years or before 4 years. We've got this crisis of getting teachers into the system, and they hate it so much because it's everything. It's the antithesis of what they thought it would be. They presumably thought it was going to be like Robin Williams and Dead Poets Society. It turns out to be a slog.
Yeah, you can romanticize that a bit, but you're right about the underlying thing is lots of people say, and there's some of this, that they leave because of poor behaviour or whatever, or too much red tape. I don't actually think that's the main reason. The main reason is they're cogs in the exam wheel. And so they wanted to do extraordinary history lessons and inspire people in history or English. Instead, as I said with the science example earlier, they're plodding through the coverage of their subjects. And also don't underestimate, for 2 years, if not 3, they are just drilling the students in exam technique.
Yeah.
You've got a 5-mark question that is of this type, and the way you get 5 marks is to use these type of words in this sort of order, in this way, in order to play the game that the examiner, who's marking 300 scripts in 4 hours at home with a glass of wine, is looking to tick off these sort of things to show that you know how to pass the exam. It's a game.
Yeah, my kids are 21 and 23, and they're just about now able to go and see Shakespeare without getting Vietnam flashbacks.
No, but it's exactly that. So you lose the love of
kind of sad.
You lose the love of the subject. The teacher thinks, I'm not here about the love of the subject. What's the discussion with their head of department? They rag, which is a red, amber, green list of which of their students in their class is on track for getting a good GCSE, and they look at all the ones that are red and what's now going to be the intervention. So I can see why that's part of the game. You want the best results for your young people, of course you do. But it's become that. There's less of a rich discussion ahead of English with a English teacher or science or whatever about what's great science teaching, or how do you expand the horizons and get people excited by science. It's about how do you play the game of passing.
Peter, do you think if we made the use of Excel spreadsheet a criminal offence, the world would be in a better place?
They'd use an AI thing instead.
There's no escape.
There'd be a more modern version of it.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right.
So no, there'd be no getting around.
So where is the government at in terms of bringing some of these? I mean, you've the more we talk about it, the more obviously shit the current system seems.
Yeah.
How are they going to improve?
Well, there's a school of thought, you see, which I don't agree with, which is, things are going reasonably well. More schools are judged by Ofsted to be good or outstanding. People are getting fairly good GCSEs. More, kids are going on to university. It's not there isn't the burning platform, as people call it, that you've got in the health service,
right.
which is
that's interesting.
Day to day, people demonstrably think the health service isn't working. People think, my local school's not bad. I think my child's reasonably happy. And therefore, the criteria for judging education has to be different. It's not, is it literally on its knees like the health service? It's, I think, an equally big crisis, but of a different kind, which is we're not preparing people for the world that they're going to
There's an 18-wheel juggernaut called the future coming down the track.
The future's coming.
Yeah.
And so it's not about a traditional concept of standards.
Yes.
So everyone always hides behind standards, as in, it might be a league table or it might be Ofsted. And of course, that's important. You don't want to lose sight of that. You don't want to be complacent about standards. There are some pockets within the country, some seaside towns, some smaller towns, where there aren't enough good schools. So you don't put your foot off the gas on that. But there's a wider argument here. So the curriculum assessment reform needs to be a radical document that is about preparing young people for the future and grappling with the problem solving, the creativity, the technology and digital and AI, and the sort of personal qualities. The worst thing about the exam factory is a lot of 21-year-old, 2-year-olds never want to learn anything again because they've gone through 8 years of hell. Whereas the one thing you want people coming out of school being good at is being a good learner. because a year later they're going to have to learn a completely new way that AI is going to be transforming their life in the workplace, or they've suddenly got to learn a new skill because of the jobs changing or whatever. And if you don't like learning anymore and that you've been turned off learning, then you've had it.
Yeah.
See, what you're describing, it seems to me, Peter, is a sort of case study stroke parable of what the whole of progressive politics should be about, which is preparation for the future, robust policies, disruption, and an absolutely, uncompromising attention to what is coming next. And it's a kind of truism, but I think Clinton said it. When we own the future,
yes, exactly,
we win.
And to be fair, Keir had a good speech where he said, where in 45, 64, 97, we've glimpsed the future in different ways.
Now we have to do all three, yeah.
Now we have to do all three, but also we are at our best when we glimpse the future. I think the best thing, actually, Keir has done since the election was the AI speech. Mm-hmm. And because he allied it not in a sort of tech bro Sunak way to a sort of, there's this thing and we've got to do something about
interview with Elon Musk.
An interview with Elon Musk. It was practical. This is can be used to transform real lives in the health service, in education. It can be put to use in a way that can benefit us, and we've got to be like that in all these different areas.
Right, just to wrap up, something I did want to ask you, if you've got any bright ideas. We've used the word progressive repeatedly throughout this conversation, and progressive as a word seems to embody all of those 7 deadly sins
It's got a lot, hasn't it?
It's got everything baked into it.
The full suite.
But it's got this moral high ground superiority and the assumption that everything else is regressive. Is there a better word?
Well, we had the Blair phrase, which I'm not sure about, the radical centre,
radical
didn't
centre.
we? Which was, I don't think it's about, and I think what the lesson of people like Trump is, it's less left and right in a traditional way. Yeah. So actually calling something the centre, I think is possibly not right. But I think it's sort of, which is a longer phrase, I don't have the answer at the moment, but it's sort of radical policies for working people.
I was wondering about pragmatism.
It's about who it's for,
What about the pragmatists?
Pragmatist sounds a bit sort of, we've seen the good thing, but we're going to do the less good thing.
Does it?
Yeah. Oh. I think radical. I'd rather be a radical than a pragmatist.
Wasn't it Roy Jenkins who came up with radical centre?
Yeah.
I think.
It may have been. It may have been.
I don't.
But I think it's.
Don't want to give Tony any praise that's undue.
Poor Mr. Tony. Poor Mr. Tony.
But it's important. Look, you've got to animate the. Look, one other thing I'd say is there was a good book in America called Where Have the Democrats Gone?
Yeah.
And at the end, the last chapter was interesting because, and this is a sort of argument for the centre, it tested in swing states what you could argue were sort of third-way positions, and they got 80% Democrat and Republican support.
Wow.
So this idea that everything is just polarised to sort of far left or far right. Yeah. And they were things that would be, and we've talked about immigration today, but they were things like, we believe immigration is good for the country, but we need secure borders so that we know exactly who's coming. Common sense statements.
Yeah.
We believe people should be able to live their lives, and if they want to change their gender, they should be allowed to do so. But we don't believe that
X, Y, Z,
men should be allowed to be in women's sports.
My worry about centrism is that it sounds like you're splitting the difference.
Yeah. Right. So the point about what I would say about those statements is, first of all, we can be reassured there is 80% support for these positions. Then the challenge still remains: how do you animate those positions?
Yeah, exactly.
So they don't just seem like a compromise between. But it is reassuring to think these are common sense centrist positions that people do support. And I think what happened in the American election is, if you've got a populist leader like Trump and someone seen as quite left-wing like Kamala Harris, but not that animated centrist position, then they'll go with the person they think is stronger and more disruptive and more sort of hopeful. And that's what they did with Trump.
Yeah.
On that note, we must draw this to a close, but I hope you'll come back at some point.
Please come back.
I'd love to.
Yeah, really enjoyed it. I hope the listeners have enjoyed it.
Absolutely,
I can bet my life they have. If you haven't read Peter's article, it's online at the New European. So go to theneweuropean.co.uk and just search in our search facility Peter Hyman. You'll find it very easily. Do subscribe to the New European if you're not already a subscriber. Go to theneweuropean.co.uk /2Mats. Costs from just a little more than £1 a week, and we'll throw in a bottle of tequila, I think, as a special
While stocks
welcome
last.
gift while stocks last. Send in your questions, any feedback to 2mats@tnepublishing.com. And thanks as ever to our production team led by Matt Hill at Rethink Audio. Peter, thanks again for giving
so
It's
much.
been great. Thank you.
giving us so much
Really
of your time.
interesting.
It's been
Very grateful.
fascinating. And on that note, we wish you all a great week.
And see you on Thursday.
See you Thursday.